Welcome back to another Crypto Daily 3 at 3. What's going on, guys? It is October 23rd, 2019, and we are doing a special Libra edition. Mark Zuckerberg testified before Congress today. So obviously a huge day in the history of not only Libra, but cryptocurrencies and cryptocurrency regulation in the US as well, although you wouldn't always know it from the line of questioning that we saw from Congress. So today, instead of doing our normal 3 at 3, I'm just going to focus on that. I did like an infinity long live thread watching the whole 6-hour thing as I was trying to do other work as well. So I spent a lot of time watching other things that were going on. And so what I want to talk through is, one, what was new from Zuckerberg's positioning; two, what was different or the same in terms of what Congress was saying; three, what are the negotiating chips now, right? What are the future balls that we're going to see pushed back and forth? Four, what were some of the best moments and little highlights? And five, just some quick predictions to end it off. So let's start with what was new from Libra. What was the same or different, right? In terms of their positioning. And I think the first thing I would say is I think there was actually less unbanked. That was still the lead of the argument. The raison d'etre for this was to help people who the financial service system weren't helping. However, they didn't beat that horse to the same way as David Marcus did. Perhaps that was because there was this they got such skepticism around it before. But that's clearly, although it is very much a part of what their narrative is, and right at the top of Zuckerberg's advanced testimony, it didn't keep coming back to it, other than he just feels like innovation should be able to go create new solutions for these populations. So I would say a little less unbanked. Same amount of Libra is in us. We're a part of it. I think that this is obviously the benefit this time around in this argument is that the Libra Association now actually exists in Switzerland. It has a 5-member board, which is different. It has 21 actual members who've started it. So you saw that kind of the same consistent narrative through line of Libra isn't us. We are a member of Libra and we're co-Libra. More, there was a lot of Facebook defensiveness this time, right? So Facebook is clearly on its back heels in this testimony. And this is kind of why I think that Facebook didn't want Zuckerberg to have to be called in, is that instead of focusing on Libra, a lot of this was about, it was a referendum on Facebook again, right? And even with the first set of testimony from David Marcus, we saw still it was so much a testimony on Libra, but now the face of, the testimony or referendum on Facebook. But in this case, Facebook had a face, right? This Zuckerberg is the face of Facebook. He is the one who people saw in the social network. He is the one who people have read quotes from, right? So it's a whole different level of Facebook acrimony. So a lot of this testimony was, we've worked hard to address your concerns on a whole slew of issues, from data privacy to diversity. We should be allowed to proceed with this. It shouldn't be a non-starter that Facebook gets to do this. So obviously we saw more of that. And finally, we saw a lot more China is a threat, right? So in the first couple testimonies that Marcus gave, it was a little bit more danced around, right? We kind of he referred vaguely to foreign actors. Obviously, since that's happened, China's been much more vocal about their plans for a digital yuan. Zuckerberg was referencing that quite a bit. So that narrative line of China being a threat rose much higher. And I think that has to do both with the what's changed in terms of China seeing Libra as a threat and aggressively responding, but it also has to do with the political climate and leveraging that a little bit more. It's not even impossible to me that they wanted to save that kind of the strongest line for further testimony when Marcus came the first time. So that's kind of part one. What was different or new from Libra's testimony? Now let's move on and talk about what was new or different or the same from Congress, right? So what was Congress feeling, or what did we hear that was different than before? So first, let's start with the same. There was big skepticism around banking the unbanked. We heard it, 4, 5, 6 times today. Just a lot of skepticism around the sincerity of the goal of banking the unbanked. Now, of course, there was the opposite side. Some people who didn't think it was really Congress's job to be the belief police and make assessments about whether they were sincere in that desire. But a lot of folks who are pointing to other areas where Facebook hasn't shown a commitment to this population and asking why it was different. So again, this is kind of why I think that maybe they backed off that narrative a little bit in terms of how hard they pushed it, is just that we got that same level of skepticism. Another same was, I think that there's a really serious contrast or combativeness between the idea that Facebook, on the one hand, and this was in Zuckerberg's testimony, wants to affirm the role of the US and the dollar in the global order, but on the other hand is using a basket of currencies and basing the Libra Association in Switzerland. That has been unresolved. And I think that we saw it kind of in the same light, right? That was being flagged before and it's still flagged now. And in fact, if anything, it might have grown a little bit, but that contrast between the words coming from Facebook that they care about the US's role and the dollar's role in the world economy, contrasted with the idea of setting up shop in Switzerland and having the dollar only be a part of the basket of currencies, was on display here. Same, we heard again people saying, Facebook, listen, you don't have the trust to do this. Like you haven't earned the right to do this. You barely earned the right to stay unbroken up, right? So that was the same. We heard that again. There was a lot more emphasis on the diversity track record. And part of that was kind of the incorporation of the housing committee piece of this and the role in the housing services industry. But it seemed to me that this was kind of the most common thread, particularly from the Democratic side of the aisle in this assessment, was Facebook's kind of, in their estimation, abysmal track record on diversity. And I will say that the unfortunate thing is, I do think that there's actually an important point here, which is that if you're trying to make a payment rail for everyone, you have to be committed to everyone. That is a reasonable point. What is your commitment to making sure this is for everyone, when in the past we've seen that everyone hasn't been kind of gotten the same mandate or the same treatment within Facebook? It got reduced, I think, to silly gotchas and punchlines around how many people, what have your hiring policies been, or how many people, how many of these Libra Association members have women or minority leadership. And like, again, these aren't unimportant points, but when we reduce them to 5 minutes of gotchas, they don't hit with the same authority. So I was a little disappointed, not that there was a focus on diversity, but that we weren't connecting the dots more with Facebook's future obligation to be a global leader if this money system is really for everyone. But we saw more of it. That's the one thing that's undeniable. Asking about the dollar's threat to the global, the Libra's threat to the dollar as the global reserve currency. I think that in previous times that only came up once or twice, maybe from Brad Sherman, who really has very strong feelings that this is what all cryptocurrencies are ultimately trying to do, is to undermine the US dollar as the global reserve currency. That came up a lot more, not surprisingly, given that you had people like Mark Carney from the Bank of England who are calling for the end of the USD as the global reserve currency and the design of a Libra-like synthetic hegemonic currency in the time since last Zuckerberg spoke before David Marcus spoke before Congress. So there was a lot more question of that. Since we last saw a Facebook representative or a Libra representative in Congress, two congressmen have written letters to Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, suggesting a U.S. digital dollar. That came up, although with not a lot of satisfactory discussion, to be honest. Seemed like they I don't know, it was weird. French Hill, who's a Republican from Arkansas, I believe, was one of the two people who wrote this letter, and he brought it up, but then spent a bunch of his time talking about other things and didn't really get to this question of would a US digital dollar just be better? It was a very fast answer. Zuckerberg only had time to kind of answer it in the most basic terms. And then Bill Foster, his co-author, didn't bring it up at all. So it was a little weird that the digital dollar did come up more, certainly because it came up at all, but it didn't really have the space that I would have expected it to. Finally, there was obviously, in terms of this global reserve status question, there was a lot more on China, a lot more people who were looking at this kind of China fear and the larger questions of currency wars and trade wars, and we're kind of vibing with that, particularly from the Republican side of the aisle. Obviously, that's a nervousness around China and China's role is I'm not going to go so far as to say winning narrative, but it's certainly a narrative that people can't not pay attention to. So that was kind of the sames and mores. There's one final more, which I think is both, it's as disappointing as it is predictable, which is the political footballing of Libra, right? So when this first came out, in some ways, people were just wrapping their heads around this. All of a sudden, they were forced to take cryptocurrency and stable coins and all these new terms seriously, right? In a way that they hadn't before, even if they'd kind of like, fielded it out to an intern to check out a little bit. Libra meant a rapid kind of uptake in that. And so those first hearings were like a couple weeks after the Libra Association was announced, and people were just catching up. And realistically, it was bipartisan concern, let's say, right? It hadn't yet fallen into easy political lines. That's pretty much gone, right? In the sense that Democrats really use this as a chance to build on the anti-tech narrative, to have a big business battering stick, and really kind of try to, like, their main points were about, there were many people who brought up just how much money and power should Facebook have in general, how much money and power should Mark Zuckerberg have in general, which, again, it's not that this is an illegitimate line of questioning. It's that Libra just slipped very easily into the kind of the standard, the rest of issues. So if you were hoping for Libra discussion or Libra specific discussion, you might have been disappointed. And it was the same on the Republican side. It was Republicans saying, look at how mean the Democrats are. We're the party that likes you. I mean, in so much, right? And by the way, go innovation. But it didn't just stop there. There were a lot of Republicans who tried to use this as bully, like basically on the one hand said, look at those mean Democrats that are trying to get you to censor speech. I want you to commit to not censoring speech. There was one Republican, Barr, I think it was, who tried to put Zuckerberg on the spot to say, hey, will you commit to not blocking any ads from Donald J. Trump or supporting Donald J. Trump? Which is like, again, it's like, one, I think anytime that you have a 5-minute slot that you're supposed to be fact-finding and gathering information and getting to talk directly from a person of relevance and importance to a particular new thing that's happening, don't use that as a chance to try to get a gotcha commitment that you hold over their head later. I mean, maybe you should. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's political tactics 101. In fact, it is kind of organizing tactics 101. But like, piss off with that, man. It's so frustrating to watch that, especially after 6 hours. So, my recommendation is maybe it works politically, but there's a whole lot of us that it turns off when you do that too. So, like I said, as predictable as it is disappointing was the political footballing of this issue. I think it's big enough that I'd like to see more. I don't think it falls easily into political lines, and I hope it doesn't just get reduced to them. But let's move on to number 3, which is what are the negotiating chips, right? So in some ways, all of these testimonies are political theater, and they're a chance for politicians to catch a soundbite, which, by the way, goes back to the political footballing and the gotcha tactics that we talked about before. But they're a chance as well to, that's part one, is the political theater. Part two is getting a sense for where you want to start the conversation that happens behind the scenes outside of these political forums, outside of these public forums. And a lot of what you do when you're listening to 6 hours of this crap is you try to figure out where do we actually pick up the conversation after? And I thought there were a few areas which were interesting indicators of that to me. Number one, and biggest in some ways, was Zuckerberg repeatedly affirming that they will not move forward without regulatory approval. So he said this to one person, then another person tried to clarify, and he said it again, and then another person, and he said it like at least 3 or 4 times, that they will not move forward without regulatory approval. And then when people asked, what if the Libra Association were to try to move on without regulatory approval, Zuckerberg even said, we try to do everything we could to get them to see it our way, which we think they do, by the way, but we'd be forced to leave the association. He actually said those words, that if the regulatory hurdles of the US were not met, that they would be forced to leave the Libra Association. That seems like a huge announcement, huge concession. One that is so big, it actually, we'll see when my predictions, it's prediction second, but I think it's a astoundingly big deal, basically, that they were willing to say that. So that's number one. Number two, we're already seeing some changes that have been made, right? So one congressman asked about the idea of dividends or profits for the Libra Association members, and he noticed that had been removed from the website. And Zuckerberg said that the investment dividend concept was either undergoing some major evaluation or reevaluation, or it was just gone entirely. So that's something that I hadn't even actually noticed. So you've already seen that to some extent there are these concessions that have already happened. A third piece which is we had read about a couple days ago, but which came up again here, is that they may be willing to do the basket of currencies thing differently, right? So this is one of the two big points with the like I said, that congressmen and women are holding up as a problematic with this idea that somehow this is pro-America, is this on the one hand Switzerland, and on the second hand this basket of currencies. And the Zuckerberg echoed earlier statements this week from David Marcus that maybe a better approach is actually one-to-one pegs of local government fiat currencies, which, by the way, is basically what Binance's Venus project, that was a reaction to Libra, was suggesting. So interesting to see that that's clearly where they're clearly signaling that is a conversation they're willing to have, and probably something that they're willing to do. So I would be very surprised, I think, in some ways, to see the basket of currencies thing survive the full gauntlet of U.S. regulatory scrutiny. One that I think is a negotiating chip that the U.S. Will like, oh, I guess one more, sorry, excuse me, guys. One more thing on the basket of currencies thing. Zuckerberg also said that to the extent that it was a basket of currencies, he wouldn't think it unfair for the U.S. to demand some amount of minimum threshold that can't be undercut, right? Because people were concerned that it doesn't matter how much the U.S. dollar's percentage starts with. What matters is in the future what it's going to be, right? Can the Libra board decide that now the dollar's not as strong, so they want to go from a half to a third of the basket, which has major effects for the basket, or major effects for the US dollar rather. So again, basket of currencies on the table. Zuckerberg said that maybe they negotiate a permanent minimum. Finally, or not finally, but next, one of the things that I think that regulators might push for, that I don't know where Facebook will land, is KYC for all wallets, not just KYC for the Calibra wallet. And this is something that I think we'll come back to, but it came up, right? That people were asking, will there be anonymous on-ramps to this? Because if so, they have a real problem with it. So that wasn't necessarily something that Libra and Facebook and Zuckerberg were signaling as a negotiating chip, but something they might have to deal with. And five, the big thing was Switzerland. Switzerland it was, again, not something that Zuckerberg was signaling as a negotiating chip at all. He stayed strong. He didn't make any commitments on that. He kept saying that it was, the right place to be for an international organization, but it kept coming up with the US government. So we'll come back to that in the predictions moment. Let's move over to just a couple of best moments. One of the congressmen compared Zuckerberg very favorably to Donald J. Trump, and unfortunately, you only had the view from the official live feed of the congressman at the time, but then later you could see on the C-SPAN feed Zuckerberg just staying as tight-lipped as possible, like basically saying, you could see in his head over and over again, saying, "Don't say anything, don't say anything, don't make a face, don't make a face," because it's obviously such a heated comparison. But a couple times, or a couple congressmen later, Juan Vargas asked him, he couldn't resist asking him what he thought of that comparison. And then before Zuckerberg could get himself into major trouble, he was like, dude, I'm fucking with you. You don't have to answer that. Don't worry about it. Because he was, you could see him building up to be like, how do I diplomatically answer this? So that, I think, was just a moment of levity in a 6-hour hearing, which you really need. Second, Patrick McHenry, he was the one who had that amazing statement about Satoshi Nakamoto in the first hearings that we heard, basically saying that what Satoshi Nakamoto unleashed is an unstoppable force in the world. It was a really profound moment. I thought he had another one of those profound moments, although because it didn't reference Nakamoto, it's not going to have necessarily the same uptake. But he said he really nailed that. I think that these hearings were to some extent a referendum on technology companies more broadly. He said maybe it's not about Libra, not about housing ads, not about Facebook at all. It's about the larger question, and fair or not fair, you're here to answer for the digital age. I thought that was just such a perfect summary of what I think is going on. And by the way, I think that also, that fair or unfair or not fair point is really true. It almost doesn't matter whether you think Zuckerberg should have to or not. It is simply the consequence of living in an era where the communications infrastructure that is privately owned is so massively more powerful than anything we could have ever imagined, right? Like, it is just in the same way that Zuckerberg didn't ask to unlock these secrets that were so powerful from a business perspective, that have catapulted him to the realm of the most powerful and wealthy financial tycoons in the world, titans in the world. It almost doesn't matter whether he would have wanted or not to have to answer for the digital age. Here he is. So I think but it's worth us all, as we think about this, as we try to contextualize it, as we try to do our best to make our way through it, to understand what's going on, that this isn't just a conversation about Libra, that this isn't just even a referendum on Facebook. This is a referendum on modern forces, and modern forces that have changed so rapidly that almost all of us are racing to catch up with it. So I thought that was a really profound moment. And then one more, got to throw it to Warren Davidson. I'll find it down here in just a second. So Warren Davidson has spent a ton of time in and around this community. He's the one who entered the word shitcoin on the congressional record in testimony with Meltem. And and so he had another great quote today where here 58 tweets into my thread. I said first mention of Bitcoin from Warren Davidson, and he made a joke. He was like, "Listen, I bet you're wishing you're Satoshi Nakamoto today." And he said, "Hard to subpoena Satoshi Nakamoto." So that was another great moment of levity, but also of more profundity underneath, obviously, for those of us who are hanging out in the Bitcoin world. But finally, let's wrap up with just a couple predictions. This one's already going long, but again, it's a huge day, so kind of important. So predictions and reflections. I've kind of shared some of my reflections throughout the way. Big surprise for those of you who watch regularly, but like, if I could wave a wand and have all of the grandstanding and showmanship and all this crap flushed out and more real conversation, even hard stuff, even stuff that is that I viscerally disagree with on a base level, or things that make me incredibly frustrated. I wish that was what the substance of this conversation is. Of course, we live in a media age, and in fact, Facebook has been a major factor in that. But so we don't get that. These conversations, I hate it when important conversations like free speech are reduced to gotchas. So that's like a meta reflection, but it's also, let's be realistic, and it's always going to be like this. So the best that we can do is try to really shine a light on the people and the conversations that are doing their best. But I think that the predictions that I have. So one, I think that the basket is on the shakiest ground. I think that basket is not long for this world. This idea of a basket. I think maybe they'll try to walk down the path of having the like a minimum commitment to the US dollar as part of the Libra Association, but I would be surprised. I mean, they are signaling pretty strongly that the basket of currencies is something they're willing to trade off to get this done. So that's prediction one. Prediction two, I think that there will be a major push, major pressure to guarantee KYC on all Libra wallets, not just Calibra. And I think that they will ask the Libra Association to put the Facebook to put major pressure on the Libra Association to do that. And I don't know how that shakes out. I think that it might be a test of what control Facebook really has, but I really believe that forget every narrative, every FUD narrative that we feel like is a real thing in the Bitcoin and the crypto industry. Terrorist money, drug dealer money, money laundering money. That is the FUD narrative that has been with this industry since the beginning and continues to be here now. And so giving their official approval to something where someone's going to go build the Hamas and Hezbollah wallet is going to be too much for a lot of people to stomach. So I think that they will want to see the export of KYC across all Libra wallets. That's one of my predictions. Number three, we have not heard the last of the Switzerland issue. And I don't know how this resolves because, like I said, Facebook did not seem to give on this. They didn't seem to have any real willingness to discuss this or bring this to the Libra Association, which could be them being coy, that could be them being smart and political and keeping things close to the chest. But I think that U.S. regulators, when the argument is we want to be the innovator as the U.S., I think that it might need to be not just pegged to the US dollar, but also built in the US. And I do think also that the Libra Association, if they want it to stay in Switzerland, is going to have a better answer than that's where international institutions go. Because guess what? There's a hell of a lot of international institutions that are based in New York City as well. So I don't know. I think that's one like I said, we haven't heard the last of Switzerland. In fact, weirdly, Patrick McHenry, I think, was actually trying to give Zuckerberg an opening to say we had to go to Switzerland because of regulatory clarity that he didn't take. So I also wouldn't be surprised if they do want to stick with Switzerland to see that come back up again. But that's one that we have not heard the last of. And then finally, this is one I have less conviction of, that I think that there'll be a push for KYC for all wallets. I would be surprised if that didn't come. But I feel like it wouldn't surprise me. Let's put it this way. That's the amount of conviction that I'm willing to give it. It wouldn't surprise me if there is a plan B with Libra in terms of Facebook as a whole. And I don't think that this is the main motivation. I certainly don't think this is why any of the Libra team members are doing this. And in fact, I think that even this possibility would be incredibly frustrating to them. But I do feel like on some level, at some part of Facebook's executive leadership, there may be a plan B motivation for Libra that is not just the unbanked, and it's not just payment rails, and it's not just the supremacy of the US dollar, and it's not even the supremacy of Facebook as a service, but that is Facebook showing that they can hear concerns and not proceed if they can't meet them in order to not be broken up in other antitrust legislation. This is not the only thing going on with Facebook right now. It came up numerous times today that there are people who feel like Facebook needs to be broken up, that Instagram needs to be pushed off. Obviously, you have Elizabeth Warren, who's starting to break out in the Democratic primaries, who has come out incredibly strongly that Facebook needs to be broken up. That is a way bigger issue than whether Libra goes through to them. If you're just talking about from a board level, from a shareholder level, from what Zuckerberg has to actually go to bed thinking about every night, it's a bigger deal. And what gets me thinking that there may be this back of the mind plan B to show how well they can cooperate, and that they can be regulated, and that they will say, okay, guys, you're right. We can't get this done right now. We really appreciate the time. We're going to keep doing our other things. It really feels to me like they may be having that as a backstop. And the thing that makes me think that is this idea that the really strong argument that they will not move forward without regulatory approval. It's so out of character to commit to that when it's not even clear, as many congressmen and women pointed out, what regulatory approval has to look like. So those are my predictions. 1, basket is on the shakiest ground. 2, I think we're going to see a push for KYC in all wallets. 3, we haven't heard the last about Switzerland. And 4, that there may be this backup plan in the back of some of their minds, maybe even that they don't want to admit, that they're trying to play nice with Congress so they don't get broken up, and Libra might be the sacrificial lamb. What do you think, guys? That's my take. I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say. Do you think this was a win for Facebook, for Libra, for the cryptocurrency and industry in general? Tell me what you think, and thanks for watching. So anyways, guys, I will be back with a normal 3 at 3 tomorrow, but until then,